Welcome to Functional Roots, where whole body wellness begins in the mouth. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Heather, and we're hygienists with a passion for all things holistic, functional, and naturopathic.
This isn't your average dental podcast. Around here, we dig deep, past the plaque and into the powerful connections between oral health, the body, and the way we live.
So whether you're a fellow dental professional, a wellness enthusiast, or just someone curious about taking a more natural approach to your health, you're in the right place.
So grab your favorite herbal tea, settle in, and let's get to the root of it all.
Awesome. And today we are welcoming on our podcast Primal Health. Emily founded the unique molecular technology at Primal Health by solving for her grandmother's and her rescue dog's dental health issues using her expertise in biology and immunology, at Berkeley and Stanford. She figured out how to influence bacteria away from destructive behaviors towards a beneficial. Simply using molecular nutrition. She has lectured and educated on the oral microbiome and is considered a KOL on the subject. I'm so excited. We're going to be talking about Primal Health and how that is revolutionizing health through SMMRT science. So, Emily, let's dive in a little bit on what Primal Health is exactly and what SMMRT science is exactly.
Yeah. Primal Health is the culmination of 10 years of me researching to try to find a safe, natural way to make my grandmother's and microbes in her mouth behave. Because what we know from my Ph.D. was in microbiology, and I worked in soil microbes and learned how they work together to move, to feed, and to survive heavy metal exposure, nutrient deprivation, exposure to ozone and to UV irradiation, even gamma radiation, they can survive. Very durable little guys. And then I switched gears and did rheumatology at Stanford. And that's when I was focusing on rheumatoid arthritis because my grandmother, who was my bestie, she's the one who had rheumatoid syndrome as well. And so her teeth were not in good shape and she had perio. I didn't know she had perio at the time, but one day my mom called me saying that my grandma had a stroke, and it turned out that her tooth got extracted the day before. Yeah. So we now know they've done really good retrospective analyses in Medicaid and also in Medicare, which is more the medical side, right? That there's a 50 increased risk of a 50% increased risk of a heart attack or a stroke if you get a tooth pulled. And that risk lasts for about 4 weeks after the procedure because those microbes just go inside and they can cause problems. They'll either leave the mouth through the gingiva after the tooth gets extracted, and they'll either go down to the heart or they'll go up to the brain. And so I think they went up to the brain for my grandma because she had a prefrontal cortex clot.
I'm sorry to hear that. So sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I went to work and I looked up what was on the market and I was just like, I feel comfortable killing the rest of healthy bacteria that are helping my grandmother try to maintain barrier function and immune response, normalization and all that. And so I literally hacked her. And so voila, Primal Health.
Biohacked.
Yes, I biohacked her.
Oral microbiome hacking.
Yeah, I transitioned my kitchen in my apartment into a BSL-2 and I did high throughput screening of naturally safe ingredients. And I used controls like triclosan and cetylpyridinium chloride and antibiotics okay, these are what we want to achieve, but we don't want to be these, right? We want the microbes not to become resistant to them. We don't want our human cells are so fragile compared to these microbes, which are super durable. And so anything like chlorhexidine, it just like wipes out our cells, but like it's almost like the bacterial.
Yeah.
So that's why we came up with SMART, which stands for Selective Microbial Metabolism Regulation Technology. So all we're doing is really choosing the right kinds of food ingredients in the right kind of combination and ratio to really stimulate microbes down a keto diet path in the mouth. And so we're literally limiting their uptake and fungus and yeast as well. So it's bacteria and yeast and fungus filamentous fungus, blocking them from seeing sugar because we've already bound it with a non-fermentable fiber that we found. And then we're adding vitamin B6, but the very active form that microbes use. And then either we mix it with calcium for tooth health or in remin, or we mix it with L-arginine for real subgingival nitric oxide production on that keto diet. And that's called Protectin. So we have 2 formulations in the market.
This is so much. I know Heather's probably going to jump in crazy, which is fantastic. Yeah, I just want to point out, Emily, thank you for your innovations. Thank you for taking something tragic that's happening and you turn it into such a positive thing that's going to help other people. And I love your curiosity in what this has brought. I'm going to let Heather just go crazy asking questions here. I will also ask questions, but I just want to acknowledge your curiosity and what this contribution is going to be when more people hear about it.
Thank you.
I'm familiar with your product. I have had some of the dental offices with working with the oral microbiome. I don't know if much about me, Emily. I work for Bristol Health.
I read a little bit about you, and in one of our clinicals right now in cancer patients, we're using Bristle.
Awesome. Yeah. So working with many of the different offices I've had other people introduce your products. I'm so excited to learn exactly how it all works, because these are things that I try to teach. And why do we want to put things that are helpful at reducing the pathology, but not obliterating everything, and then catering to the good species in the mouth in that perspective. And I get to teach both medical and dental on this. I just got off a call right before this talking to a functional medicine doctor. And now I'm going to have to go back and put some of this stuff into her care plans, because there are so many different species that are problematic and pro-inflammatory and cytokine exciting, even beyond the red complex and orange complex bacteria. Streptococcus species, Staphylococcus, Enterobacter species are all problematic. And most of those eat those carbohydrates and sugars too. So when we can have some tools to really dampen down their appetite and reduce those, because they get super opportunistic in nature, it's awesome to have tools that aren't just obliterating the entire space, especially with Enterobacter species. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enterococci grouping, Serratia, Klebsiella, those types of things. They're antibiotic resistant.
Yeah.
And when we start putting chlorhexidine in, it can help drive up the antibiotic resistance of those specific species, which is even more problematic because they have so much of that health issue, like what your grandma is having issues with. I'm actually dealing with a Klebsiella overgrowth in my grandma's biome, so I can share some of that. But what inspired you to focus on the oral microbiome beyond, you went from dirt to, was it solely, like, how did you start into understanding the oral microbiome from going to dirt to the mouth? What was your transition there?
Actually, the dirt is cleaner than the mouth.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
No, as an undergrad, I was a microbiology major, and I studied tuberculosis and how it can hide out from the immune system for decades before it reactivates and takes down its host. And then I also rotated through really cool labs at Berkeley, the Ebola of the caterpillar world, and Listeria, which causes foodborne illness, and it's an intracellular pathogen. And then I landed in the Myxococcus xanthus lab. But so it was honestly my grandmother and her struggles, and then finding out she's not alone, because a couple years later I rescued Tins, and who was about 10, and she was bred her whole life, caged. She was a Cocker Spaniel, black and white. I have a soft spot for black and white Cockers, and they said she needed a dental. I'm like, oh, I got this. Yeah, I had grandma came up with the faucet, put it in lozenges for her because she couldn't brush her teeth. She didn't lose another tooth on it. And then when I got her, Tins was like distressed. She smelled like death. This dog really has gum disease and needs help. And by the time I drove her from Central Washington back down to the Bay Area where I was living at the time, she basically had full-blown sepsis. So it was emergency department, 21 teeth extracted, $6,000 on my credit card to save her life, pump full of antibiotics and oral and IV she was in the hospital for several days, and then they released her. And then I had to give her several rounds of antibiotics to clean her up because the infection had spread from her gums to like bladder, kidney, all over the place. So she was cute. And then I started hacking dogs. And then I realized, wow, if you're a mammal and have a mouth, you have a problem. And the current approaches, a brush and floss and water pick and what else, it's just not working, right? And that's where I'm like, you can't tell people to change their diet or change their lifestyle unless they're super motivated. They're not going to do it. So the other way I was thinking about it is how can I stop oral microbes from eating and seeing the things that I know cause big problems, which is sugar.
Yeah.
And so that's what we then focused on because it afflicts almost 80% of the population.
Oral
It's a
disease
problem.
does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's why I completely changed my career plans. I've been focusing on this now for 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you. We need people like you that are innovative and rethinking the oral environment. And like you said, flossing, brushing, minimal part of what we have to look at the airway, we have to look at the gut health, we have to look at the good bacteria and the bad bacteria and where all of that is playing. And diet makes a huge difference. And if we can't make those shifts, it's awesome to have some tools to put the bugs on a keto diet. Can you explain a little bit about each of your products? You have 2 human products. We can walk in. Amanda has puppies. I have grand puppies. I have 3 grand puppies. Tell us a little bit about how the technology works. You have 2 different, you mentioned the calcium-based one and then the arginine-based one. Not everybody is familiar with arginine. Can you give us a little bit of science behind arginine and the nitric oxide connection with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So unlike you're starting to see trends. So previously in medicine, particularly in gut microbiome, everybody was doing sequencing, who's there. And now they're starting to do metabolomics, which is what are they making? And so we've been doing both the whole time. But also looking at behavior because microbes behave, they're social organisms, they have behaviors. Some are like the schoolyard bully, others are super passive aggressive, but will pounce on you when you turn your back on them. And then others are really nice and get along with everybody, and some can be perfectly innocuous and neutral, but then behave badly if they're around too many bad influences. And so
Fusobacterium is one of those.
Yes. Fusobacterium is one of those guys that it's super social, loves to party with everybody. That's why it's involved in so many different things. And you find it in so many different disease states. It's like, hey, party everywhere. And it travels throughout the body.
You pair him with Trinella forsythia and PG, and then he becomes the bad teenager.
Yep. And Candida is all over the place too. Sinister, slowly. It doesn't grow as quickly, but it slowly looks to see how it can like get a big edge and it'll send out antimicrobial agents and then grow up really fast, which is why you crave sugar about 2 days before you get a yeast infection, ladies, because it can do that. You can tell you're craving something. And then it causes cavities and gum disease as well. And then there's Malassezia, which is the fungus that causes dandruff, but it causes gum disease. And we're finding it in bacterial vaginosis because the microbes in the mouth don't stay in the mouth. They go genital urinary as well. We swallow about 3 billion a day and they influence downstream. They make it through the stomach acid. We were always taught stomach acid kills everything. That's absolutely fake. And the truth is that they get through. They can definitely hang out in strong acid for a little bit of time and transit through the stomach into the ileum where they get washed in a bath of bile and stuff like that and bile salts. So they're super durable. And that's where I think folks need to realize that, everything we think of as far as cleansing and clearing and SRP and all of this stuff doesn't get rid of them. They grow back really quickly.
Yep. And I find when I go to courses, there's the good stuff are going to come back before the bad stuff.
The bad stuff comes back fast. So we have faucidant and protectant. These are 2 examples. Faucidant's the one for enamel, and because every single tooth we're finding has its own unique microbial fingerprint. So each microbes on the crowns of the teeth or in the crevices are different composition than the shaft, and especially below the gum line. And you need to stop the microbes from making acid. And then right then you need to introduce that calcium, which is why we have faucet and why we built it that way. So it blocks acid production until someone eats again, that's why you want to take it right before bed, because then they're pooping acid during the night if you don't use it. But if you do use it, you at least know that those microbes aren't pooping out acid while you're sleeping.
So
And
is that like a paste, or how does it
Oh,
apply on the tooth?
yeah, no, it's just a rapid melt lozenge. So this is the original that I built for my grandmother. So she could, at least after she had something, because remember, she couldn't brush her teeth because her rheumatoid was so bad. She couldn't even hold it. She could barely hold a fork. And in nursing home, after her stroke, she went into a nursing home. So they didn't do any oral care. And so this was all she had. And so she took 4 a day, one after breakfast, one after lunch, one after dinner, and then one right before bedtime. And she couldn't do any physical disruption. It was just that. But she didn't lose any more teeth. But she was very religious about taking every day after she ate, and then once right before bed. And then we have toothpaste tablets as well. And then we also have a dried powder that can be added to drinking water. And that's compatible with thickening agent. Because when we were doing memory care studies, we found that the lozenges were fine, except for patients that had late stage dementia, because then it became a choking risk. So we took the active ingredients and just raw active ingredients and made a water additive out of it so that it could be added to their thickening agent in their drinking water, because they do stay hydrated throughout the day, even in hospice care.
Awesome. So you can put this, basically a powder, into your water
Yeah.
and have the benefits of it. So are you adding that in each glass? Just how much do you add to each glass?
Yeah, we have a sachet. We sell a sachet a day. It comes in either unflavored or in the flavored is lemon rind we use, but we pH it with xylitol and sodium bicarb to bring it back up to 7.5. So we have a lot of pediatric dentists giving it, and moms buying it and giving a sachet in the kiddos' water bottle that they send them to school with, so that they're at least helping their oral microbiome and blocking microbial acid production during the school. And then Protectin is our newest formulation. That's for gingivitis and gum disease, because we found that there's a ton of anaerobes in the below the gum line in patients with bleeding gums, or in early stage perio, or even late stage perio. And so what this is doing is basically really that arginine. It's not the same mechanism as what came out of SUNY University, and which Colgate now has. This is literally, we're providing the carbohydrate block, which must happen. And then we're stimulating the cells, the microbes, to then tear apart the L-arginine that we're giving them. So that's the steak that they're eating. And they can only do it if they have the vitamin B6, the pyridoxal 5-phosphate form, which is the active form. And so that's basically fits it. So if this is the enzyme that rips apart and that eats protein inside bacteria, we're giving this little tiny vitamin B6, which fits right here, which makes it change shape so that it's active. And then we're feeding it the L-arginine. It binds, it starts ripping it apart, and eventually it leads to nitric oxide production. And so in our time course studies in people's mouths, and we've done now 595 patients, public health, between 18 and 80 years old, and showing the same trend. So there's a sustained production of nitric oxide. So it's not the same as like that chewing gum that releases the nitric. This is actually the bacteria below the gum line that are eating keto and making nitric oxide throughout the day, and even at night when you're sleeping. So they're chasing away the anaerobes naturally.
So you're using the Bristol test. Are you looking for the nitric oxide reducing bacteria? Are you finding other species that are helpful in that perspective too? Because we have our nitric oxide score, and we have a list of different species that are, and we're looking at the capability, the genetic ability. So it's beyond just the bacteria that's present there. They're looking at the genetic capability of the oral microbiome in general for that. But I love it that below the gum line, I was always taught like the nitric oxide bacteria are more on the niche of the tongue. So I like having that below, because nitric oxide is incredibly important for tissue integrity. So if we have a perio patient, nitric oxide is part of that vasodilation, immune system response, and then tissue integrity, which for vascular health is important, for gut health is important. But when we're dealing with perio, the endothelial cell in the perio pocket is also gaining space for that nitric oxide. I love it. So exciting to have a conversation with this. Amanda, do you have any questions?
So, as the only clinical hygienist here in the group, no, looking at clinical implications of the patients that I have in my chair, like the first thing that kind of came to my mind, cancer patients, right? Because they're just, oh my gosh, like my heart goes out to people. I actually had somebody in February come into my office. He had been diagnosed with colon cancer. And I just saw his wife yesterday. And I had been thinking about this patient. I'm like, I haven't seen him. I haven't seen him since he started treatment. And I'm really curious with all the recommendations I made for him, how he's doing. It's been 6 months. He's supposed to come in every 3 as a perio patient. So I'm really curious how he's going to look. But obviously, it can be perio, it can be caries as well with treatment for cancer with radiation and chemo, which he had both. On top of that, though, I'm just curious, we know brushing, flossing, like it's not always just the end of the discussion. There has to be more. We need to look at the oral microbiome, the nitric oxide, the lifestyle factors and habits. And you make a very good point. Getting people to change their diet, unless they have a very hard motivator, is difficult. But I think it is a root cause, and that's something we need to address and at least talk to patients about. But with the products, we still need to do microbial biofilm disruption, though, correct? So,
Well, yeah, that's one of the questions I have. And I keep on asking the field is, do it? And I don't know the answer because I'm an outsider, right? I'm just what I know is if microbes are sugar starved, they break down their own plaque and tartar softens really easily because you change the charge so that the calculus doesn't it softens and it just wipes away. See this in our dog and cat studies, and in particular because these animals don't get their teeth brushed. We just finished a clinical study in gingivitis and seals and sea lions, and they brushed it or they gavaged, and it got rid of their gingivitis and their calculus in the back. And then they took them off of it, and then the gingivitis came back in a couple of weeks, and now they're permanently on it. But they don't get their teeth cleaned.
And dogs don't either. It's a pretty big process. You have to put them to sleep. And then my girlfriend, I'm going to have to see if they're actually using it at their dental office, or she has a perio office for her pets, that she's the dental hygienist for them. So I'll have to see if they're using your product for their pet patients. Interesting that you went both perspectives. Super.
It's, believe it or not, it's the same. It's slightly different ratio of ingredients, but it's the same ingredients because there's so many carbohydrates in kibble. And kibble is being sold on the market as a physical disruptor of plaque. But it actually, in our studies, it actually enhances plaque production. And it grows the really bad microbes that are linked to gum disease and downstream diarrheal diseases and irritable bowel and stuff. So it's interesting. And Amanda, back to your point on cancer, the newest data coming out on some of these papers that are on these checkpoint inhibitors, which are a class of oncology med, is it's speeding up gum disease. The meds are.
Oh, I bet.
They don't know how.
Your stuff. I was like, wait, what?
No, the checkpoint inhibitors are somehow speeding up the disease process. So one of the questions we're asking is, can we slow that down with our technology?
So crazy. This is honestly way more than I was anticipating out of this episode. I'm like, dang it. It's a lot to absorb. Just, I don't want to say it goes against everything that we're taught in hygiene school. Because we still, I think this is the paradigm shift that we're having in oral healthcare right now, in oral medicine, is biofilm management. And I think there's so many ways, point in case right now, to manage it. We've been harped on. It's all about biofilm disruption. And you're saying, maybe that's not the case.
If someone has a healthy biofilm that's not causing disease, do you really want to disrupt it?
Because it's healthy. Yeah. Like the person is not, but I think you have to look at both the oral systemic side of things, especially with your quote on 50% of people who have a tooth extracted end up with having some sort of cardiovascular or brain event after. And I actually know someone who similarly, she's a nurse, went and had an extraction done, was having heart symptoms, went to the hospital. They ignored her. And she was like, something's going on. She went septic because the bacteria in the mouth don't just stay in the mouth. So many people forget that the mouth is part of the entire body. And that's the part that I get to teach. And any way that we can work on trying to shift, I see wildly crazy biomes, and then I see biomes that aren't really that bad, but maybe there are some in the raw results section that I start focusing on for medical purposes and start researching into that. But microbiology, man, I wish I had gone into microbiology.
Well, it's if you take a top level view, you got a hole and you got a hole and a big tube in the middle. And the most bioabundant or quote unquote dirty is the old school way of thinking, or the microbially enriched sides are both by the holes.
Yeah.
Everything else is fairly not diverse and not bioabundant, but towards the holes, it's extremely diverse and extremely abundant. So we need to walk carefully because it's not like we're very careful about how we prep for colonoscopy before you go snipping. We don't take that same care in the mouth.
And when we are headed into oral surgery or surgery in general, we should be looking at the mouth because we do know it's all correlated. And diversity is important in the mouth. We want a certain amount of diversity. There's beneficial bacteria and there's advantages of having pathology in there. They keep the environment in check. I just spoke on last weekend at the IOMT on diversity itself. Serratia marsicans. Interesting, going back to Candida, right? Most people think of Candida being extremely opportunistic, and it can be really bad, and that's what they really think. But in the Bristol test, at 100%, in the 100th percentile, it's at 0.36% relative abundance.
Yeah.
Which really isn't that opportunistic.
It's small in most patients, but if patients are immunocompromised, like my grandmother,
it's problematic.
Yeah.
But the Serratia and Enterococci groups, I've seen as high as 97% relative abundance. And think about that transition and how those bacteria translocate and implement gut and brain and heart issues. And
Are those people
relative abundance?
Are those people not shutting the lid when they flush the toilet? Or is their toothbrush right next to the toilet? Those are the questions, because that's such a fecal.
Definitely washing hands, making sure it's environment. It's all picked up from the environment. Cross-contamination becomes really a conversation, making sure they're putting devices in an ultrasonic cleaner. Encouraging hygienists to make sure that they're following good protocols and not aerosoling it everywhere, then we're spreading it, because it's the number one groupings of bacteria that cause hospital infection.
Yeah.
So these are big baddies in a lot of perspective. And it's really interesting sometimes to see biomes that are just completely wildly taken over, and the diversity gets all out of shape. And then we get this battle of the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. Streptococcus comes in play and comes really opportunistic as it's trying to correct it. And Rothia and some of those other Bionella species I see shifting to try to correct that biome. But it's important to incorporate things like what you have and correct and starve out and then regrow, because the beneficial bacteria like fiber, they like protein, they're not eating those sugars. So when we can starve out certain ones and then have a good diet where we're feeding the beneficial bacteria, or maybe using probiotics in combination with something like that, we can plant good stuff in to help balance out and grow a better garden.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It's all about garden cultivation and horticulture.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We all love to garden here. So that's Heather and I have both definitely made those analogies previously in different ways, just how the mouth is very much a garden, and you get to pick what you grow. But
that's super. I'm excited. Do you have anything else like innovative that you guys have in the works? What kind of science can you share with us?
Yeah.
And other things that we could start thinking about with shifting. As a microbiologist, you have far more understanding than all of the research and the hygienist information that I've looked at, but feel free to dive into some of the cell biology and how you discovered and how we as hygienists could understand how diet and like xylitol is pretty profound. Not so great in the gut always for some individuals, but I find it doing a similar thing where I'm getting a good shift in the beneficial and it starves out a lot of the problematic beyond just strep mutans. It's really not there that often in that perspective. But if you can you share some of the science behind cell biology and how it all works?
Yeah, you bet. Every single cell in our body, both microbial and our own cells, have needs, and nutritional needs are number one. And the way that our mitochondria work is very sugar driven. And the way that about 80% of the roughly 80% of the microbes that inhabit the mouth, also primary carbon source is sugar as well. And when our microbes eat sugar, they convert it into acids, butyric acid, propionic acid, acetic acid. That would be great if it was the colon and the ileum and the small intestine, but we don't have as much mucus in the mouth as goes downstream, which protects the epithelial lining. So acid in our mouth can create leakiness and stress. So you can get a stress response in the epithelia and fibroblasts and in your innate immune system, because we have tons of these lymph nodes right below our tongue, and on the outside you can feel them, and then they go all the way down, they drain. And so we find that the higher the acid content, particularly women have higher acidity in our saliva, the more inflamed we are. And the leakier our gums are, because we hear about leaky gut a lot, but leaky gums is something to think about. And that's, yes, can be gingivitis, but can also be smaller than a red blood cell, which is pretty big, but allow those microbes to kind of squirt through the leakiness in the membrane, which allows them to permeate into our tissue and spread, which is why a lot of women that get derm injections in their face, fillers, they wind up getting an infection in their face derived from the microbiome below the gum line in their tooth. It just goes right up. And some of these folks that are getting these dental implants, so we're working in implantology and stuff like that to grow better microbes prior to the procedure, because they're really disrupting a lot. And I come from rheumatology, which is bone biology and bone metabolism and stuff. And so it just seems like such a harsh way to treat your bones. And then you're perturbing the microbes that are living in the bones and in the bone marrow, because there are microbes down there. And no one thinks about that either. Villanella and some of the other species. And so they're growing up and out again because you activated that. And so then you get a little bit of a inflammation. And if you grow the wrong kinds of microbes, we're finding they're starting to eat the titanium of the implant. And they're secreting these waste products that are really toxic, which is upsetting the mucosa further. So you got a couple of bad things going on. There's acid. You just perturb the system, change the biofilm. Now you're giving a new food source, which is called titanium, which is going to favor certain kind of microbes. And then they're going to make waste products that are really toxic. And you're perpetuating this cycle. We feel strongly that's the hypothesis that based on what we're seeing in vitro and who we're seeing growing up in mouths of patients that have in a time course studies.
And who are you seeing?
A lot of staph, streps, Salmonella for sure. E. coli, you're seeing a lot of your Serratia, your Klebsiella, Pseudomonads for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are the big ones.
Even what
Clostridia.
strep species are you seeing?
Sanguinis, mitis, Group A, Group B.
Okay.
People don't talk about that enough, and we're seeing that a lot in folks' mouths.
So strep sanguinis and strep mitis, we tag a little bit as a beneficial bacteria. It's another one that might. Yes. So I've been having this debate because strep mitis I've seen, and people will have some halitosis issues. And I'm like, at what point is it a beneficial and what point is it helpful? So as a microbiologist, it's helped me understand some of those strep species and how they can be helpful. And then at what point do they have a turning point? Because strep mitis is tied to endocarditis in larger numbers, and I see it sometimes in really large numbers. So sometimes I'm like, okay, at what point are we helpful and what point are we not so helpful? And you're finding it around implants, titanium implants. So is it the benefit of strep mitis helping with the inflammatory and the aspect of healing in that component, or is it more problematic in that?
So I'm going to take my microbiology hat off and I'm going to put my immunology hat on.
Okay.
Strep species in general, the surface proteins that they have are highly pro-inflammatory.
Yeah, they're the LPS.
And even the protein A they have.
Okay.
They have protein G and protein A, the two surface markers from Staphylococcus and Streptococcus. And those are some very pro-inflammatory markers. The peptidoglycan, which is their cell wall, which is the biggest component of them. They have lipoteichoic acids on the surface that are really pro-inflammatory, that activate what are called toll-like receptors on the surface of our innate immune system. And our fibroblasts have them, and our epithelial cells have these, and they shout out if they get triggered too much. So if there's a bloom of strep, it can be the sanguinis or, whatever folks believe strongly is the most anti-inflammatory, helpful microbe. If it's a strep or a staph, it's going to sound the alarm from the immune system, and then the cavalry is going to come in. Because they're just, these microbes are very inflammatory.
Right. And that's going to step up the cytokines and the CRP levels and all of that.
Yeah.
So it is alarming to have streptococcus at 30% of the oral microbiome.
Too much is not good. Too much is not good.
Yeah.
But what we're born with and what our biofilm or microbiome fixes at, which is around 3 or 4 years old, then our immune system gets tolerized to that. So it learns that self. So if you wind up with a infection like foreign invaders, the most common is you're dating someone for the first time and then you French kiss and then they introduced all sorts of microbes into your mouth. The most common thing is a sore throat. And so that's because there's new residents and there's a new turf war and you just disturb the balance. And most often than not, it's strep or staph that are really sounding, the immune system is sounded, right? And they're starting to take residence in the biofilms in the mouth or in the throat as well. And so that's where you're getting that. That's how inflammatory. And like from rheumatology, we know that patients with like psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis have extreme immune reactions against their own staph or strep. And then we know that patients that have gone like a lot of ear infections as kiddos, if you go on multiple rounds of antibiotics as a kiddo, you change your microbiome. It becomes foreign because you're no longer, it's changed so much and shifted so much that it's no longer self, it's foreign. And then your immune response can catch up. And so that's why patients that have had multiple rounds of antibiotics in their childhood wind up with a significant increased risk of developing an autoimmune disease later in life.
And food allergies.
Food allergies, asthmas.
Yeah.
All of those things.
Awesome. Fascinating. I love this.
I loved microbiology in college, but you guys are definitely well past my level, to be honest. But we're finally having this conversation in the public square of microbes and bacteria. And I would love to see the day where we get rid of all the hand sanitizers just everywhere. It drives me crazy in my office. We have hand sanitizer everywhere and they're constantly pumping it on their hands. I'm just like, you guys stop it. Go wash your hands if you want to get rid of that. But the hand sanitizer freaks me out. It's just so many things that we need the good stuff and you've got to stop doing some of these things. But gosh, no, this is just fascinating. And I really wish public perception of oral systemic was more than what it is. I think this is a whole other conversation and I don't want to start a whole new conversation, but I think so many people, again, don't realize the implications of the mouth as the gateway to the body. And especially in dentistry, they just think, oh, I'm just going in to get my teeth clean. They're just polishing stuff up and just don't see that, man, this is the start of you as a person because you're outnumbered. The microbes in your body outnumber you significantly, obviously, outnumber our cells. And just how important that microbiome balance is not something that's on 90% of people's radars. And it's frustrating as a dental professional when those patients don't get that and maybe don't have that conversation. But man, when you do finally get those patients that maybe have heard of the Human Microbiome Project and you can just like Let's talk about it. It's so engaging. So I love this. I love the research. I love the technology. Like, this is not stuff that you get to hear at a dental conference. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just had lunch. This woman wanted to have lunch with me. I was visiting my aunt and uncle for the last 2 days in Houston, Texas. And she's a physical therapist, and her father has Alzheimer's. And she calls our lozenges magic pills because it's what keeps him from getting aspiration pneumonia and going into the ER. And I'm like, no, it's not the only thing, but this is the only difference. And she's put him on it 2 years now. And the most important one is right before bed, which is what she heard me saying on a podcast or whatever. But it's if you clean up the mouth and just keep it well balanced, and those are self microbes that you inhale, even if you aspirate all the time, it's not, they're still self and it's balanced. So checks and balances are really important when you're dealing with population control and pathogen control. And so you can have 0.5 or 1% of the oral microbiome compartment be true pathogens and have them held in check by beneficial microbes because that's their job. And like lactobacillus makes a ton of antimicrobial agent to keep populations down. And a lot of the other good guys do that too. It's a great microbe that's a guardian microbe. And our data shows we can encourage its growth because it can eat keto just as easily as it can eat sugar. So that's just an example of one-off anecdote, but you wouldn't realize that just rebalancing the oral microbiome might have that significant of a downstream impact.
No,
Well,
and that makes total sense. Sorry, I'll give you a second, Heather. I think what people don't realize that they're out of balance because they've been out of balance for so long. It's like when your gut health is so wrecked and you finally do like an elimination diet and get your gut health back on, and you're like, whoa, that's what it's like when I eat bread now, or that's what it's like when I eat rice that's not prepared properly. Like, you feel that immediately. So what would you tell somebody that they could expect to feel their microbiome to get balanced in their mouth? What would that feel like, and what would that change be?
Oh, it could be anything, but most folks don't even pay attention to themselves and how they feel because they're not really in touch with themselves.
Yeah.
So that's where the salivary tests come into play because they're great ways to educate patients about this is your profile right now and you're in the danger zone. So let's do this. And you come back and see me in 3 months and let's test again and see what it looks like, see what shifts were made. And that gets their buy-in and it starts to educate them. But right now it's really hard to do downstream testing to show systemically, except for A1C or blood pressure, maybe office blood pressure you take to show, hey, we shifted it and now your blood pressure is 10 millimeters of mercury lower. Those are the kinds of things you might want to think about, or weight loss. Like we had a dentist contacted us because a patient was actually keto diet. And on her keto diet, she lost only 20 pounds over a year on keto. And then she took our Fossident lozenges and she lost another 50 pounds. She didn't do anything differently except for take that. But we put her microbes on a keto diet, even though she was on a keto diet, because microbes can make sugars out of whatever they can, because carbon is everywhere in our bodies. Oxygen is everywhere in our bodies. Hydrogen is everywhere. So they can make sugar just as easily as they can rip it apart. Is that interesting?
That's
super
fascinating.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's all connected. I'm definitely gonna start thinking about putting this in my care plans on a regular basis. I've tickled it in every once in a while, but didn't really understand the science. Of course, I know how arginine works, which is probably unusual. Can we use both products in combination? What's the ideal way to utilize the products, or maybe combining the products for patient scenarios?
Yeah, it depends if there's caries risk. I'd point them more towards the Fossident. If they have gum disease issues, or gingivitis or inflamed anything, or if you're prepping to put a patient do an SRP, get them on it sooner than later before you do that SRP. Because you never know who's going to be in that patient's mouth unless you do a bristle or any of the other salivary tests. And this is just an example. Patients tend to can chew up like their Fossident lozenges before, and then they trap it in their aligner and they go to bed. So that's an example of a treated patient, and this is an example of a non-treated patient. You can see it's discolored.
Wow.
There's biofilm on it.
Awesome.
So there's
Love
different
this.
ways you can we try to be as flexible as possible. Like I don't like anything in my mouth. So I just chew our toothpaste tablets, brush my teeth with it twice a day, and I use our water additive because I drink water throughout the day.
Yeah.
And we're finding it's more important to do it periodically throughout the day. But the most important one was right before bedtime than it is to just do one hit in the morning and then that's it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Perfect.
I love this so much. I love options for patients.
And
One size does not fit
honestly,
all.
if we want patients hydrating. So
Yeah.
if we can encourage them to hydrate and then just add a sachet into their water, one, hydrating them, which is going to just help with cell function in general. And then two, we're just going to help balancing the oral microbiome in a simple fashion. I love
Yeah.
it. And the xylitol isn't super high where it's going to impact gut health. I know that's a question. There's
No.
so many crazy conspiracy theories on xylitol and heart health and all of that.
No, this is again just a tiny bit of xylitol to just bring the pH of the lozenge up, not to do anything to the oral microbiome.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I know there'll be questions on that, like with some of the research that's come out on xylitol.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Also,
And
microdosing.
Yep. So this is everything we're doing is microdosing the microbes, and our non-flavored water additive doesn't have anything except for the active ingredients. So there's no xylitol, there's nothing. It's just, and it has you can taste the arginine though. It's got a little bit of a fish. Arginine tastes like fish. So you just dilute it in a lot more water.
And then talk a little bit about the vitamin B and how that kind of plays a role. I know one of the products on the market is going in this alternative mode and they're using niacinamide. Obviously, you're using a different component of it, but let's talk about the benefits of vitamin B and how you're using it and your thought process on niacinamide.
Yeah, I like niacinamide. I'm just really sensitive to zinc. So because it makes me schluff because I have an autoimmune disease. So it just, that doesn't, but niacinamide is good for the immune system and the innate immune response, which is why it's important that it's in some products that have where patients really need the extra immune help. And ours is pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is it's the essential vitamin required for bacteria to break down protein.
Okay.
And there's not enough of it in the mouth. That's in the truest, most active form. So we're just supplementing and they're grabbing it right away and using it.
Super. Awesome. Thanks for explaining that.
Yep.
Great. Awesome. We always finish up with a fun question because we like people to listen to our podcasts and we like to know what you're listening to or maybe what you're reading. What are some of the podcasts you might be listening to or something that you might be currently reading?
Oh, I'm nerding out on history podcasts right now. And I just got into it. I can't remember Amy Poehler's podcast. It's funny and nice and it's uplifting, but I like everything from medieval history to history on women. There's a history podcast called Betwixt the Sheets, which is fun to listen to. And it's all about the history you won't never learn about in college or in high school. And so it's pretty fun. Like Henry VIII and like how he had such insecurities because he was shamed based on his manhood when he was the king. And that's how he compensated in various different ways. So it's just the fun stuff that you get to learn about, but it's just, it's a human touch element that I like to learn about.
Awesome. Super. Thank you so much for coming on today. We greatly appreciate this conversation and a different perspective on the oral microbiome. And this is what I love to jam out on and talk about. So greatly appreciate sharing your science and how we can use your products to shift because we need to be thinking about shifting and creating balance and homeostasis, not obliterating everything. So it's fun to have tools that can help us and then understand how those tools will work. So thank you so much, Emily, for coming in today.
No, this is great. And this is the least I've had to truly explain stuff because you've done a great job just talking about what we need to do. More of is not kill, but nurture.
Yeah. Awesome. Perfect.
100%. Where can people find the resources that they need to either find your products or more about your research? What's a good place?
They can start by going to primalhealthllc.com. That's our company website. And you can either learn what we're doing for pets or you can learn what we're doing for people. And then I'll take you to different websites from there. Or you can email us at info@primaltx.com, primaltx.com. And from there with questions, and we can address any questions you guys have.
Awesome.
Super. Awesome. I need some samples so I can put them on my shelf.
But we can send some.
Yeah. Super.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of the Functional Roots podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us to stay connected. And if you enjoyed the episode or found it helpful, we'd love for you to share it with a friend.
Awesome.
Yay!
Yay. Thank you.